Flight 737 from New York to London was cruising at 35,000 feet when a mystery unfolded. Mrs. Eleanor Harrington, a prominent archaeologist and a passenger in first class, had vanished without a trace. The flight attendants had last seen Mrs. Harrington seated in her first-class compartment, engrossed in a thick, leather-bound book about ancient civilizations. When the plane hit some turbulence and the seatbelt sign came on, they had approached her to ensure she was safely buckled in. She smiled and gave them a nod before continuing to read. However, when the plane stabilized and the attendants returned to their duties, they found her seat empty. A thorough search of the aircraft yielded no results, and the door to the compartment had not been opened. The captain was alerted, and the flight crew interviewed all the passengers in first class. They all attested to never seeing Mrs. Harrington leave her seat. Furthermore, her belongings, including her book, purse, and passport, remained undisturbed. As the airplane continued its journey, Inspector Daniel Archer, who happened to be on the flight as a passenger, was asked to assist. He began his investigation by questioning the passengers in first class, reviewing the passenger manifest, and examining the crew's statements. No one seemed to have a motive to harm Mrs. Harrington, and she had no known enemies on the flight. 4 clues began to emerge. 1. The book. Mrs. Harrington's book was a rare and valuable relic from her archaeological expeditions. Why would she leave it behind? 2. The lavatory. Mrs. Harrington had not visited the lavatory during the flight. There was no sign she had ever left her seat. 3. The watch. A fellow passenger in first class mentioned seeing her check her wristwatch just before her disappearance. The watch was later found still running on her seat. 4. The cabin crew. The flight attendants distinctly remembered her being in her seat when they last saw her. They confirmed that no one had entered or left first class without their knowledge. As the plane approached London, Inspector Archer was no closer to solving the puzzle. Mrs. Harrington's disappearance was baffling. She couldn't have simply walked off the plane without notice, and there were no secret compartments or exits in the first-class compartment. The airplane was about to land, and the mystery seemed impenetrable. Can you solve the enigma of the vanishing passenger? What happened to Mrs. Harrington on Flight 737? Now, before I tell you the answer, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about it or go and re-watch the scene, for there could be something you missed. Starting now. The answer to the mystery of the vanishing passenger, Mrs. Eleanor Harrington, is that she was never truly on Flight 737 in the first place. Here's how. The book. Mrs. Harrington's valuable book, as well as her purse and passport, was strategically placed in the first-class seat to create the illusion that she was present. The lavatory. There was no record of Mrs. Harrington entering or exiting the lavatory during the flight because she was not there. The watch. The watch left on the seat was likely a decoy set to run normally to divert attention. The cabin crew. The flight attendants were inadvertently part of the ruse. They saw Mrs. Harrington in her seat when they last checked on her, but did not see her leave because she was never physically there. The true perpetrator was an imposter who boarded the flight and managed to create the illusion that Mrs. Harrington was present. Using clever props and timing, they fabricated her presence in first class. The imposter, after successfully diverting attention, escaped the plane during a layover, leaving Mrs. Harrington's belongings behind to maintain the illusion of her presence. This intricate and well-executed plan allowed the imposter to take advantage of the flight's distraction and disappear, along with any possible motive or objective that led to this elaborate scheme. The disappearance of Mrs. Harrington was, in fact, an audacious act of identity theft and illusion, rather than a classic in-flight mystery.